Today's subject is nuclear energy. And of course, one of the reasons we are against nuclear energy, one of the reasons, is that as long as you have nuclear energy, you can make nuclear weapons. But our main reason to get rid of nuclear, and that was a very slick film. Very slick. A lot of things it didn't say, and it tried to convince you that, we have environmentalists who've changed their minds. But I think they haven't got the, and you see, so many of they talk about fourth generation nuclear reactors. These are theoretical nuclear reactors. There are no fourth generation nuclear reactors. So when they make all these claims theoretically, we say that's not acceptable. And our main reason why we oppose nuclear energy is because of the lies that are propagated by the nuclear industry. First of all, nuclear energy is not cheap. You heard them say it's cheapest energy? That was an absolute lie. Now, we have produced a public petition, and we're trying to get signatures. It hasn't been, we haven't got people working hard enough on this. And if you read this, I brought copies for you, you can take home and read. And so one of the reasons is it's not cheap. Now, if it was cheap, and if you could make a profit out of it, where do you think all these capitalist corporations will put their money in? In nuclear reactors. And nobody does that. Because the expenditure for nuclear energy, very high construction costs, okay? A nuclear reactor perhaps would last for 40 years, not 100 years, 40 years, and then you have to decommission these reactors. And that is very, very expensive. So, there's absolutely no truth that nuclear energy is cheap. And this is something that has been said by many economists, even by this great capitalist journal, The Economist itself, says nuclear energy is not cheap. So that's one of the lies that has come across there. So it's not cheap. It is not safe. And the reason why it is not safe is Fukushima, Chernobyl. These accidents, these are major meltdowns, don't happen very often. But once they happen, you're in serious trouble. There are lots of lies, they say, propagated in that film about Chernobyl. Lots of lies. And the WHO and the United Nations were taken for a ride. This was at the time of the Soviet Union. And they covered up. And the only disaster that you compare Chernobyl with is Fukushima. And I don't know if you've been reading the papers or watching it on television today. 2 years ago, Fukushima had a meltdown. And we are in serious trouble. It's in Japan. They have, see what happens, you know how nuclear energy works. It's nuclear fission. Now when you split uranium, the uranium atom, when you split it, it produces heat. And this heat is used to boil water. That's nuclear energy. Boil water to produce steam, which works on turbines to produce electricity. So you get nuclear electricity from nuclear energy, by boiling water with the heat which comes from splitting uranium atoms. Okay? And that's nuclear energy. And what happened in Chernobyl was something went wrong. There was overheating, and there was an explosion. And this is exactly what happened in Fukushima again. It wasn't the tsunami that caused the Fukushima disaster directly. The direct cause of the Fukushima disaster was its electricity supply was cut off, and therefore the cooling system failed, and therefore it overheated and it exploded. Now, can you imagine human error? You know, how easy is it for human beings to make a mistake? And you've heard of the precautionary principle. If something can go wrong, in time it will go wrong. And this is what will happen eventually. So it's not cheap, and it's not safe, and it's not clean. And why do I say it's not clean? The end result of any nuclear reactor is fuel rods, which can't be used anymore. And this is plutonium or uranium fuel rods. And the half-life of plutonium is 24,000 years. In other words, if you have a lump of plutonium that size, in 24,000 years, the radioactivity, the radiation from this lump of plutonium will be halved. So we are really talking about radioactivity forever. I mean, can you imagine managing waste for 240 centuries with plutonium? Can you imagine that? 240 centuries, 24,000 years. And this is a legacy you want to leave future generations? I mean, this is an insanity. And there is no method of safely disposing of nuclear waste. None. Where is all that waste stored now? They are stored in tanks alongside nuclear reactors. Every nuclear reactor with nuclear waste has its waste stored in tanks. So can you imagine leaving this kind of legacy to future generations? I mean, this is so immoral. Absolutely immoral. Okay, we're worried about climate change, but nuclear energy is not the answer to climate change. It's not the answer. Renewable energy is the answer. And of course, the whole system of unsustainable development. Why are we producing so much rubbish, consumer goods, which you and I are indoctrinated to purchase? We don't need to lead lives with cars, you know, huge cars. You can ride around in little cars and reduce your carbon emissions. But this is the way. I mean, we are living really unsustainable lives today. Absolutely unsustainable. Can't go on. And you can see what's happening with climate change now. See what's happening. I mean, this is not imagination. It is getting warm. You're getting more rain, you're getting more floods. And eventually, it's going to ruin ruin the world. And we have not found an answer to it. There's not one nation in the world, not one government in the world, who has committed itself to reducing carbon emissions. Not one. The whole protocols that have been in the United Nations that has been going on for the last few years is not going anywhere. Not going anywhere. And why do you think there is so much poverty in the world? Not because there's not enough development. There's not enough sharing of the wealth we have in this world. 1% of the population owns, 90% of the wealth of the world. That's why we have poverty. That's why we have poverty. Unfettered capitalism. So, I think nuclear waste, which is going to last for 240 centuries, is something that we shouldn't leave future generations to deal with. To me, this is a very moral question. And all these reactors, fourth generation reactors, theoretically, it can do this, it can do that. Theoretically. But they haven't produced one fourth generation reactor. Not one. Very slick film. I would love to have a conversation with every one of those chaps in that film. Because they said things which were not true, and they've left out a lot of things that are true. My biggest objection is the nuclear waste, which is going to last 240 at least. That's plutonium. Cesium and radioactive iodine, their half-lives are much smaller, much shorter. But you're left with a lot of plutonium. And most of your reactors are plutonium. So, anyway, there are copies for you. You can take these copies back with you and read it. And there are lots of arguments here about health and safety, about the economics, the environment of nuclear energy, the limitations and so forth. And of course you know that our wonderful Malaysian government, who is still in power, unfortunately, is planning to build 2 nuclear reactors. You know that, do you?
Yeah.
Yeah, 2 nuclear reactors. And you know what our standard of maintenance in this country is? Can you imagine a Fukushima in Malaysia? They have identified 7 possible sites. 7 possible sites. 5 on the coastline and 2 near 2 lakes. But they haven't decided where they're going to build this. It's a 2-unit nuclear power station. 2 reactors in one area. And if there was a Chernobyl or a Fukushima disaster on any of these chosen sites, we're a little country, very narrow country. If it's on the east coast, what do you think is going to happen in Kuala Lumpur? If it's in Perak, what's going to happen in Johor? And in Fukushima, they have something like 1,000 drums of radioactive water. See, when Fukushima happened, when there was this meltdown because of overheating, they flooded the reactors with water. But of course the water's boiled up, and so there's a lot of hot water. And so they've been recycling cold water and collecting all this hot water, radioactive hot water, because they bathe the nuclear rods in water. So it's all been contaminated with radioactive substance. and they've stored all this hot water. And there's a continual stream of water because it's so hot. The rods are so hot. And so they're circulating water and collecting the hot water now in drums. And some of those drums are now leaking radioactive water. I mean, it's in the papers almost every day now. And the company which is responsible for the TEPCO, Tokyo Electric Power Corporation, TEPCO, don't know what to do with it. Whatever they do is not working. And the government said, now we're going to take over. And the government says, or somebody is proposing, to seal it off, to seal that whole area of 4 reactors by building, encasing it below the reactor, underground, with frozen ice. Nobody has ever done this before, but this is theoretical. They're going to have frozen ice below all the reactors to prevent the leaking of radioactive water into the ground, from the ground into aquifers in Japan, and or into the Pacific Ocean. You know, this is not a Japanese problem, you know. It's not even a regional problem. This is a global problem. It's become a global problem. And they really don't know what to do with this Fukushima disaster.
So when they say that the number of deaths is just about 50, is that like an outright lie, or are they spinning it in a certain way?
I mean, some people have died. I mean, you see, the thing with radiation, unless it's a severe dose of radiation, you could die within a few days, or within a few weeks, or a few months. But radiation is something that works on you over many years. Now, if you have an X-ray of your chest every day for the next 6 months or so, you're going to get cancer. So a lot of the side effects, the health effects of radiation in Fukushima are not going to happen now. In 10, 20, 30 years' time, it's going to affect people. And in Fukushima, once it goes into the aquifers, into the water underground, what are you going to do for drinking water? And into the Pacific Ocean as well. We'll all have to stop eating fish, seafood. So it is a very serious problem. And if you can't dispose of your nuclear waste, which is going to last you for 240 centuries, then there's something wrong about this. And we should put our money into renewable energy. We're not ready to meet all our energy needs with renewable energy. But in some countries, it's already about halfway up. They've reduced their fossil fuels with 50% renewable energy. So it'll happen in time, but we've got to put money into it and find the best way of using renewable energy.
So
Yeah.
what is the situation of Malaysia right now?
Sorry?
How is it Malaysia doing with renewables right now?
Well, you can see a few solar panels and that kind of thing, but we haven't really gone into it. We're reducing coal because we're using gas, which is less polluting. Yeah.
I think the issue right now, though, is that because we are not ready to replace our energy sources with renewable energy, at the moment it seems to be nuclear versus coal. Like when Fukushima happened, I know that Germany was planning to build some nuclear power plants. But instead of building those nuclear power plants, they went on and built coal instead, which happens to release a lot more carbon dioxide into the atmosphere. would you answer?
No,
that?
this is a huge dilemma we are facing, and not going to be easy solutions. But the answer is we have to reduce our development as well at the same time. We have to change our lifestyles. We've become terrible consumers. Insane consumers. We don't need to live lives the way we live lives today. We're consuming too much, really.
But if you look